Welcome back, fellow football fanatics. It's your host, College Football with Sam. And before we get into today's topic, I want you all to answer some questions of mine in the comments section below. Number one, how's your week been? I've had a pretty rough week, so let me know how your week has been and a little bit of personal information about your week, if you're comfortable with that, in the comments section below. Number two, what are your predictions on this game? A score prediction, some statistical projections, and also your overall analysis of this matchup. I gotta be honest with you all, and I'll get to your comments as quickly as I can and I'll answer them in a timely manner. Also, we're having a live show tonight with a special guest on at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. So make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss when me and my friend, College Football Stats, as he's known on Instagram, are going live here on YouTube and talking about Week 5 games and Big Ten football as well. But to get back to the topic, I can't believe that this is a night game. It's very hard to process that. You know, Michigan and Nebraska, that would, in my mind, that deserves to be the primetime matchup. Instead, that's a 3:30 p.m. game Eastern Standard Time. For folks who live in Nebraska and Nebraska fans, that would be a 2:30 p.m. Central Standard Time matchup. But Michigan State instead takes the road to Iowa to play in the Big Ten's night game at 7:30 p.m. on NBC. CBS, NBC, Fox, Big Ten Network. I know that the way that these schedules are structured is determined by the Big Ten's new and very luxurious and lucrative TV deal, which is the best TV deal out of any Power 5 conference in college football. However, as much as I like Big Noon Kickoff and Gus Johnson and Joel Klatt, and as much as I like the different time slots and how games in one way or another have been spread out well in some instances, in other cases, Penn State and Iowa playing at the same time as Ohio State and Notre Dame isn't ideal. This right here is something that is to a certain degree a little irritating. Because Iowa last week got shut out by Penn State, and Michigan State looked like crap against Washington, for lack of a better term. And against Maryland, even though they played the Terrapins closer than the score indicated, they still had a horrible outing of college football, committing 5 turnovers, only scoring 9 points, and surrendering 31 total points to Talia Tagovailoa and Mike Locksley's roster. So, again, Michigan being the number 2 team in the country and traveling to Lincoln, that, in my mind, is a much better nighttime and primetime game than Michigan State, whose season is likely already over, traveling to Kinnick Stadium to play an Iowa team who I think would lose to Nebraska at this very moment on the road. Iowa's offense is pedestrian. They're somehow worse than last year's, despite having new weapons like Eric All, Caleb Brown, Cade McNamara at quarterback. They only have 245.5 total yards per game on average. Meanwhile, their defense is allowing 313.8 total yards per game. They're passing for less than 150. They're rushing for less than 150. Defensively, they're allowing nearly 200 passing yards per game, and they're allowing over 125 rushing yards. Their defense, in the realm of yards, not points. Points are obviously more important. Their defense is allowing more yards than their offense is forcing on opponents. That's very concerning. And this is from an Iowa team that has played Utah State, Iowa State, Western Michigan, and Penn State. Penn State being the only competent opponent they have faced so far this season. I know Iowa State is a rival and it was on the road, but nonetheless, Iowa has not fared well against Group of 5 and low-tier Power 5 competition. They looked like the far inferior team compared to Penn State. Penn State killed Iowa with short plays, consistency, not turning the football over, and also elite defense, and forcing Iowa to fumble the ball 6 times and recovering 4 of them, and also securing a muffed punt. Penn State outplaying Iowa, actually, on the special teams front as well. Michigan State, meanwhile, they have allowed 72 combined points in their past 2 games while only putting up 16. That's ridiculous. That is utterly reprehensible. That's horrid. Noah Kim, he looks like a MAC-level quarterback. 6 passing touchdowns, 3 interceptions. He's 66 of 116 on the year, so he's struggling to complete 50% of his passes. He's averaging 7.7 yards per pass attempt. He's been sacked 5 times, and his stats don't even tell you how bad of a quarterback he's been because they're puffed up by a game against Richmond where he averaged well over 10 yards per pass attempt with 3 passing touchdowns, and a game against Central Michigan where he started out rough but finished decent with 2 passing touchdowns and 279 passing yards. Against Maryland and Washington, he's averaged less than a 100 passer rating, and he's averaged around a 28, 27, 29 quarterback efficiency rating. Right now, he has a 40.1 quarterback efficiency rating, which is good for 106th nationally. Cade McNamara isn't better, though. In fact, he's worse. He has a 29.5 quarterback efficiency rating, which is 124th nationally. In sum, both of these offenses are terrible by any metric. And defensively, Iowa is in a better position than Michigan State by a mile, but I'd also argue that Michigan State has the more functional and superior offense to the Hawkeyes. I think the Hawkeyes have the better offensive line and the better tight end room, but Michigan State has the better quarterbacks. Noah Kim as a starter is better than Cade McNamara right now, and I think Katon Houser and Sam Leavitt would do about the same as Noah Kim would do if they were to start. Meanwhile, Cade McNamara, behind him, he has Joey Labus and Deacon Hill, who probably stink more than he does at this current moment. Iowa has tons of injuries at running back. Luke Lachey is out for the season. Michigan State also has better wide receivers. This is a matchup of teams that I had inside of my top 25 in the preseason. And as much as my takes on Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan being, top 10 teams has been correct, and I think Wisconsin at this moment is still a top 25 team. They just started out slower than I expected. I've been wrong on teams like Minnesota, Michigan State, and Iowa. Teams who I thought would play at a top 25 or maybe slightly higher level, but overall have just remained relatively the same compared to last season. And it's disappointing. It really is. Michigan State is outside the top 50 in FPI, and Iowa's outside of the top 30 in FPI. The line used to be Iowa minus 12.5. It shifted to Iowa minus 10.5. And it's about a 55-45 split in favor of Iowa when it comes to people betting the spread right now. So there is a lot of conflict about if this game's going to be close or if Iowa is going to have a monster comeback win after being humiliated on the road and returning to home. FPI thinks Iowa is given a 71.7% chance to win. The game's going to be in Kinnick Stadium, which historically has been a hard place to win, especially at night. But Michigan proved last year that if you have an offense that can move the ball and your defense can either catch Iowa's offense on an even more off day than a typical offensive day for Iowa, which by most standards is an off day every Saturday that a Brian Ferentz offense takes the field, or if you have an elite defense, you can go into Kinnick Stadium and not just win, but also dominate. Iowa State last year, they gave up 2 blocked punts, and they did not have a good team. They went 4-8. Despite giving up 2 blocked punts, they won 10-7 because Iowa's offense indeed was that horrible. In this year, whether it's due to injuries, coaching, a combination of the both, likely heavily leaning toward coaching, the offense is just as bad, if not worse. Michigan State's 2-2. Iowa is 3-1, and they're coming off of a shutout loss to Penn State. Michigan State, meanwhile, is coming off of 2 beatings at the hands of Kalen DeBoer and Mike Locksley, who, as genius offensive minds, put down their headset, called the right plays, and let their quarterbacks just dial up Michigan State's defense and slice them through the air, while also having some limited success on the ground as well. Roman Hemby didn't perform too well against Michigan State, but Antoine Littleton did. Michigan State, in saying that, does have a pulse on defense, but that's more in the rushing defense department. The good news for the Spartans is Iowa doesn't have an effective passing offense that likely can take advantage of their bad coverage at linebacker and also just their poor secondary in every sense of the word. They struggle at tackling. They struggle at making plays when, the ball is thrown to them on accident or by mistake from the quarterback. They struggle to cover. They struggle at everything in Michigan State's secondary, much in the same way that Iowa struggles to do anything with competence on the offensive side of the football. Also, he who shall not be named, also known as Brian Ferentz, he's a bad offensive coordinator, but Michigan State's Jay Johnson has been doing his best effort to mimic Mr. Ferentz in totally obsolete and ridiculous play calling. To his credit, the Maryland game was one of his more adaptive and better games, but I would argue that Maryland's defense wasn't as good as Washington's and certainly isn't as good as Iowa's, so we don't know if that will mean anything in this matchup. All I'm trying to say throughout this video, and you'll hear me say it again, is both of these teams are not good. And after watching 4 weeks of football, and I was high on Michigan State and about even on Iowa compared to what, national experts and pundits had to say, overall, I was too high on these teams. I was wrong about them. They're a joke. They're a total joke. Michigan State needs a better coach, a far better coach than Mel Tucker, one who can do a better job of, leading young men, and one who can do a better job of recruiting, developing talent, making better coordinator hires. They need a better head coach than Mel Tucker. Mel Tucker obviously now has been fired due to the whole accusations of sexual harassment, but the staff that Mel Tucker assembled is still commanding this team with the help of associate head coach Mark D'Antonio, but Harlan Barnett, who was brought back to Michigan State after his stint at Florida State, he's the interim head coach right now. This whole staff was built and glued together by Mel Tucker, who's now gone. And if Michigan State wants to move forward in the world of college football, they need to do differently than what they did under Mel Tucker. I'd argue that something that the Spartans did do right was invest a lot in Mel Tucker. Luckily, they were able to get all of their money back and all of their resources, and they should use those same resources but put it toward a great head coach and a great staff. Because like Mike Valeni said, Tucker, Johnson, Hazelton, total grifters in every sense of the word. Total grifters. And you could say the same with Iowa's Brian Ferentz. I don't know how he's still employed. It's a mystery to me, outside of the fact that, nepotism, coach's son. But if you're Kirk Ferentz, don't you have a desire to win? And not just win 8 games or 7 games or 9 games, but you're in the Big Ten West. And in the early 2000s and in 2015 as well with Greg Davis at offensive coordinator, and he wasn't anything special, you were competing for the Big Ten legitimately. Like you had an actual shot to win the Big Ten, not like in 2021 or in 2022 if they beat Nebraska, then they would have went to Indianapolis again, where you would have been the sacrificial lamb and were the sacrificial lamb to Michigan. Brian Ferentz is just straight up incompetent. I can't even believe it. In total yards, they're like 130th nationally. And Cade McNamara, right now as of this year, is a 104.4 passer rating. I know McNamara had a better supporting cast at Michigan than he did at Iowa. but those numbers are horrific. And Brian Ferentz is mostly responsible for that. He schemes up the offense, calls the plays. He's in charge of everything offensively. Kirk Ferentz, believe me, being a special teams defensive-minded coach, has totally given the power of the offense to his son and delegated responsibility to him. Now, look, defensively, Phil Parker, phenomenal defensive coordinator. I'd argue the best defensive coordinator in the country currently. His defense has also had some struggles this season, but overall, still great defensive coordinator. What he's able to do with the talent that he has and reload is phenomenal. And LeVar Woods, phenomenal special teams coordinator, just like how Phil Parker is with the defensive play calling, defensive coordinator position, and also in coaching the secondaries. But Brian Ferentz, horrific offensive coordinator. I cannot say that enough. Let's talk about the position advantages. I think that staff, looking at LeVar Woods and looking at Phil Parker, those are phenomenal position coaches. And in the case of Phil Parker, he's a position coach with the secondary, but he's also the defensive play caller and defensive coordinator. He organizes that side of the football. Those are more than competent staffers for Iowa, and Kirk Ferentz has a good reputation as a coach. Michigan State, meanwhile, has interim head coach Harlan Barnett, and both of their coordinators are arguably, I don't know if I'd say they're as bad as Brian Ferentz, but neither of them are competent. So in sum, I am going to give the edge for staff to the Iowa Hawkeyes. Michigan State has an edge, I think a significant edge, at skill position. At quarterback, running back, and wide receiver, I think they outduel the Hawkeyes. At quarterback, I think this is obvious. I thought that McNamara was going to be slightly worse than Noah Kim entering the year, and that's held true, and slightly worse might be disrespectful, even to Noah Kim. Cade McNamara has a 104.4 pass rating, as I've already said. He's thrown for 4 touchdowns, 3 picks. He's been sacked 8 times. He's averaging 5.4 yards per pass attempt, and he's completing 50.6% of his passes. That's depressing. He has 43 completions and 85 attempts. It's ridiculous. He looks like Spencer Petras, like a slightly better Spencer Petras. And Spencer Petras is as low as you can get as a quarterback. So for Cade McNamara to only be slightly better than Petras is quite sad indeed. And Deacon Hill, behind McNamara, 4 of 8 for 49 yards. He's only completed 50% of his passes as well. He has a 101.4 passer rating. Meanwhile, you look at Michigan State, and Michigan State has Noah Kim, Caton Hauser, and Sam Leavitt. Hauser and Leavitt were 4 stars coming out of high school. Noah Kim was a D'Antonio recruit. Collectively, the quarterback room is averaging 7.9 yards per pass attempt, completing 57% of their passes. They've thrown for 1,064 yards, 6 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. They have a 132 passer rating, which is much more suitable for victory than a 104.4 passer rating. It sounds like Kim is going to be starting this Saturday against Iowa, but it wouldn't surprise me to see Hauser or even Leavitt have action if Kim is not performing to a winning standard. He has 6 passing touchdowns, 3 interceptions. He's averaging 7.7 yards per pass attempt, and right now he has 897 passing yards. Not a good quarterback. I'd say a below average to bad quarterback, but right now he's performing better than Cade McNamara. And unlike McNamara, Kim has weapons to throw the ball to. Jaron Glover has 9 receptions for 203 receiving yards. Christian Fitzpatrick has 7 receptions for 166 yards. Trey Mosley has 13 receptions for 157 yards. Monterey Foster Jr. has 11 receptions for 147 receiving yards. Malik Carr has 10 receptions for 113 receiving yards. Collectively, Iowa has 47 receptions for 508 receiving yards. and they have 4 receiving touchdowns. Michigan State has more than double the receiving yards than Iowa does. And that's shocking, especially when you've seen Michigan State's bad quarterback play the past 2 weeks. And Washington and Maryland, especially Maryland, they don't have elite defenses, but Washington's is a top 25 defense, and Maryland's defense has been able to keep the Terrapins treading water when they've trailed against Charlotte and trailed against Virginia, and when their offenses went stagnant against Michigan State. They do have solid players on the defensive side of the ball. They do. So Michigan State has players at receiver. Jaron Glover and Fitzpatrick are averaging over 20 yards per reception. Same with Antonio Gates Jr. So Kim has more weapons to throw the ball to. Right now, with Luke Lachey being injured, between Malik Carr and Eric All, I'd say Malik Carr is the better tight end. Michigan State has the better wide receivers. I just think that behind Malik Carr, the tight ends, whether it's Jalen Franklin, Tyneil Hopper, or Evan Morris, they've been so disappointing. Meanwhile, Iowa does have Eric All, and they do have some other backup tight ends that I think are serviceable. And given the reputation of Iowa at tight end, I would slightly lean Iowa here in a similar way that just from a one-on-one starting basis, I would slightly lean Malik Carr over Eric All. But that's a very close position. At receiver, Michigan State has an edge. At running back, Nathan Carter behind a bad offensive line has been averaging 5.1 yards per carry with 4 rushing touchdowns. He has 369 rushing yards and 73 carries. Meanwhile, for Iowa, Caleb Johnson is hurt. Other running backs are hurt, but Johnson's the one that I know of for sure, and he has 34 carries for 1 touchdown, 91 yards, and he's averaging 2.7 yards per rush. Between LaShawn Williams, Jason Patterson, Kamari Moulton, I think Williams is the one who's healthy, or maybe one or two of the 4 that I mentioned who are healthy. Williams has 25 carries for 173 yards. He's averaging 6.9 yards per carry. Now, those statistics are coming off of a ridiculously good game against Western Michigan, who honestly is one of the worst defenses in the country. He had 12 carries for 145 rushing yards, and he averaged 12.1 yards per carry. And he is playing behind an offensive line that, despite McNamara only averaging, around 20 passing attempts per game, McNamara's already been sacked 8 times. On average, you could say that McNamara is being sacked one time for every 10 passing attempts. That's a pretty bad ratio. That's very bad, especially when you consider that Iowa returned most of their offensive line production from last year. Regardless, I am going to give offensive line to Iowa, and I think they are also better at run blocking. I think Michigan State's offensive line might be better at pass blocking. Then again, Iowa's offensive line faced Chop Robinson, Adisa Isaac, Curtis Jacobs, Abdul Carter, and a defense that was better than any defense that Michigan State has faced so far this year. We'll learn more about both of these offensive lines and really the entirety of these teams when they play against each other, because they have performed well against inferior competition, at least when you look at the scoreboard, and they've performed horribly against competent teams. So now that these two units have had some similar experiences when they play different levels of competition, these two teams are more equal than, let's say, Iowa was to Penn State or Michigan State was to Washington. So now we're going to learn even more about these two units. I have no doubts, though, that Iowa has the better defensive line, linebacker room, and especially defensive back. Iowa has Xavier Nwankpa, Sebastian Castro, Cooper DeJean. All of those players are better than Jaden Mangum, Dylan Tatum, and other players at secondary, that like Charles Brantley, for example. Iowa has the higher ceiling players, the higher floor players, the more consistent players. Iowa's defense and secondary, despite having some vulnerabilities, they do well in coverage, they're disciplined, they take advantage of mistakes. rather than making several mistakes that give opposing offenses more opportunities to score, which has been the reputation amongst Michigan State's secondary. I also think Iowa has the better special teams unit, though this is close. Michigan State does have a good punter, and they also have a good kicker. Iowa does too, but I trust LeVar Woods as special teams coordinator, and I trust Kirk Ferentz and his staff more than I do Michigan State staff. And also, Iowa has the better reputation at both of the positions. They do. Iowa returned their kicker and punter. They returned Drew Stevens from last year's team. He's 4 of 5 on field goals so far. His long is of 34. Meanwhile, Michigan State has a new kicker in Jonathan Kim, who's 3 of 4. He's at a long of 52. He's pretty accurate, has a powerful leg. All in all, though, factoring in punt coverage, kick coverage, Cooper DeJean's been a very good kick return and I think punt return, more importantly, specialist. So I'm giving the edge to the Iowa Hawkeyes in the special teams realm. Finally, some players to watch. I think Noah Kim for Michigan State is a player to watch because he has legs and he can scramble, and Harlan Barnett did say that he's looking to get Noah Kim more involved in the run game, and I think seeing that he has speed and a scrambling ability to him, I think that's a very wise idea. Noah Kim also has shown capability with the deep ball. I think that is one of his strengths. Part of that is his receiving core. He's struggled a lot more with short and intermediate throws than he has with longer, more vertical throws. And while Iowa, they're not known to be a team that gives up big plays, I have noticed more vulnerability in their pass defense than I have in the previous 2 seasons, in 2022 and 2021, when I've paid a lot of attention to them. I think that Noah Kim, if he can have confidence, if he can make some of those short throws and also run the football, I think doing those things and, taking advantage of Iowa not being an uber aggressive defense and marching down the field, eventually, if he can make those short plays, Iowa might want to dial up pressure. They may want to get aggressive, get creative. That opens up opportunities for mistakes, blown coverages, which are rare, but it happens to everyone. And with those explosive receivers, they're not like Jaden Reed, they're not like Keon Coleman, but they're better than Iowa's receivers. And Glover, Fitzpatrick, Antonio Gates Jr., Trey Mosley, they do have upside. Maybe Noah Kim can get a big play. Or if he's running the football well and passing, maybe that spreads out Iowa's defense, and maybe Nathan Carter can break off a big run. He's at a long run of 44, and despite playing behind a very mediocre offensive line, he's still averaging 5.1 yards per carry. Very underrated running back, and I think the success of Michigan State's offense depends on Noah Kim, and I'm focusing on the offense for Michigan State more because I think it's becoming clear, whether it's the Washington game or the Maryland game, that the defense has players, but they are going to allow opposing offenses to do better than their average. So Michigan State's defense will not shut out Iowa's offense, even if Iowa's offense does have an off day, a demoralizing day, and they make mistakes. Michigan State is going to allow a field goal, a touchdown, a field goal and a touchdown, or maybe 14, 21, or several more points than that to Iowa's defense. They're going to allow, in my mind, anything from 3 points to in the 30s to Iowa's offense. I think I said defense earlier. Pardon me. So Michigan State's offense needs to get a jump start. They need to get going, and they need to be active. For Iowa, it's linebacker Jay Higgins. Jay Higgins currently leads the Iowa Hawkeyes in total tackles. He has 50 total tackles, 28 of them are solo. He has a forced fumbles, 2 passes defended, and his partner, Nick Jackson, who is second in the team in total tackles with 36, he has a sack and also has a forced fumble. For Iowa, if their linebackers can play intelligent ball, not make too many mistakes, and if they can match up with Malik Carr, they can cover, they can blitz, and they can just command the field and make it very hard in any circumstance for Michigan State's offense and tackle well. I think that Michigan State is a team that, with their receivers and also with Nathan Carter, they can benefit off of broken tackles and mistakes. I think Nathan Carter is a running back that has power and also has speed. And if Jay Higgins and Nick Jackson, if they just tackle well, they can stop big plays from occurring or even the chance of big plays, and they can force Michigan State to really grind it out offensively. And I don't think that would work too well for Michigan State. If Iowa's defense plays a perfect game or a near perfect game, it will be hard for Michigan State to score more than even 14 points. But then again, we also have to consider the fact that Iowa's offense on their own might struggle to score more than 14 points as well, as Michigan State's defense has better players than Western Michigan, Iowa State, and Utah State. So this is the second best team that Iowa has played on their schedule so far, which is pretty jarring, but it also goes to show how good Penn State is in comparison to everyone else on Iowa's schedule, that including future opponents as well. Penn State by a mile is going to be the best team that Iowa plays all season. So what is my prediction? I'm shockingly going with the upset here. I think that Iowa, I know they're returning from home after being humiliated by Penn State. It is a night game. Maybe I'm picking blind here, but I don't think so. I think Cade McNamara has looked horrible. I know that he may be out for revenge against a Michigan State team that he felt robbed him of a chance for a big win in East Lansing. But Michigan State remembers Cade McNamara too. And I think that that defense is going to have some confidence in knowing that they still beat Cade. Despite McNamara throwing for nearly 400 yards, at the end of the day, they still forced some key incompletions, and Charles Brantley intercepted him to secure Mel Tucker's biggest win in his coaching career. By the way, as a Michigan fan, I find it sad that Jim Harbaugh is 1-2 against Mel Tucker, especially after the events that transpired a few weeks ago. I think the Spartans will have 250 plus total yards on Iowa's defense, and Michigan State's defense will do just enough to win, which I think includes forcing one or more turnovers and likely getting a few tackles for loss, maybe a few sacks as well. I mean, look at whether it's Simeon Barrow, Jordan Hall, who's Michigan State's highest rated linebacker according to Pro Football Focus, and also Jacoby Windmon and Aaron Brule. Jalen Sammy is a big, physical guy at defensive tackle. There are players on Michigan State's defense, and against an Iowa offense that I don't trust, I think it's horrible. This, to me, screams like a game where you have to take the under. You have to. And maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm reading this wrong, and I'll be the first to admit when I'm wrong. The over-under is 36.5. And Iowa is favored by 10. They're favored by 10. It's 36.5. It's basically saying that Iowa is going to win 23-13, 24-13. I don't even know if I can see it happening, but really? This offense is dealing with so many injuries, which are very unfortunate. I hate injuries. And as much as Michigan State's secondary is terrible, Iowa's passing offense is also terrible. Michigan State could probably zero blitz all day, and Iowa couldn't get too many receivers or even their tight end open for big gains. The Hawkeye offense is among the worst offenses in college football. They struggled against Utah State, they struggled against Iowa State, and they struggled against Western Michigan before running up the score to help Brian Ferentz keep his job. I think against a Michigan State team that, despite having their own faults, is still better than Utah State, better than Iowa State, and also better than Western Michigan for sure, even though Western Michigan and Michigan State have both been disappointing in terms of the state of Michigan's college football programs. I think that Michigan State has good enough players to come out and challenge Iowa, and at the end of the day, LeVar Woods and Phil Parker and their great coaching and Iowa's great players on defense and even great players on offense won't be able to stop Brian Ferentz from messing this game up. Michigan State with their wide receivers, I expect to probably get one big play. Just one. I don't know if it'll be a touchdown, but I think it will be a play that is of 30 yards or more. An Iowa victory is very much possible. I think that Iowa, more times than not, if we were to play this game 10 times, would win. But I think this is one of the few times where Michigan State comes out on top. I expect the Hawkeyes to be flat after their performance at Penn State, where they could never get anything going. They were demoralized. Penn State got in their heads. I mean, Penn State did to Iowa what the Hawkeyes did to Penn State in 2021, but it was so much worse. 31-0 doesn't even encompass how dominant the Nittany Lions' performance was. Again, if Iowa wins, I will not be surprised by that. And I said earlier in the video that I think the under, in my mind, is an easy move. I'm not a betting expert, so take my opinions with a grain of salt. And I personally look at this game and I would stay away from it because in my mind, part of me thinks that either it's a close Michigan State victory or Iowa just completely tears this team apart in an outcry of anger from last week's performance. Thank you so much to my Patreon followers for sponsoring this channel and supporting this community. Remember, if you're on Patreon and you're paying for a membership, you get benefits depending on your tier, either extra content or everyone gets featured at the end of every, and I mean every, video. And by supporting the channel, you're supporting everyone on here. Your support helps me be able to make more content for all of us. Thank you again for watching. Please subscribe, like the video, and comment your thoughts down below, and I will try and get to your comment as soon as I can. Have a great day, guys, and I cannot wait for Game Day Saturday, which is tomorrow, along with Oregon State and Utah. And remember, finally, tune into our live stream at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Have a great day.